watching Balkans in Europe and One Television and European Fund for the Balkans program from the European Parliament. I'm Ivana Dragicevic.
And I'm Borjan Jovanovski. Temporary border controls have been introduced in the so-called Balkan route from Macedonia to Austria and Germany, threatening the cherished notion of freedom of movement across European borders. Refugees and migrants are being profiled.
Greece says that without an implementation of European Union's deal with Turkey, it cannot avoid a humanitarian disaster. NATO ships are set to patrol Aegean Sea, and European countries are pursuing their perceived national interests instead of seeking collective solutions, and the notion of European solidarity is fading.
How can Europe manage to respond effectively to such an unpredictable circumstances? We'll try to discuss today with our guests.
I'm welcoming today with us Ms. Urlike Lunacek, Vice President of the European Parliament from the Greens. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for the
Mr. Andrej Plenković, Vice President of Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee from the EPP, largest group in the Parliament. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
And Mr. Neil Campbell, Acting Director of the Open Society European Policy Institute. Welcome to our program.
Hello.
Madam Lunacek, Mr. Plenković, question for you. Almost 1 year since crisis started, EU still missing a common policy to respond to these increasing problems. Could we talk any more about EU common policy, or we are witnessing the fall of EU?
Well, the situation is dramatic. We have seen that the very good proposals that have come from the Commission and that the Parliament has supported have not found the necessary response in Member States. And you know, any kind of action from the EU has to be acknowledged, has to be shared by, in that case, each and every Member State. And if they don't, the EU, the Commission, the Parliament hardly has any mechanisms to make the Member States move. So the problem is in the nationalist attitude of many Member States, not all, but many, not to agree that we don't just have a crisis of refugees, we have a crisis of solidarity, yeah? And the crisis of cooperation, because the European Union was built on cooperation instead of conflict. And we see now that this is falling apart, that national interests come up again, and this is really very dramatic. Of course, we need more common action, and what I really criticize is that some Member States are not willing to take in to the distribution of refugees. That would have been a good start. From the 160,000 agreed upon with qualified majority, but that's what it is in a democracy, yeah? That's something the majority decides, yeah? That not even those have been relocated to Member States, only out of the 160,000, a couple of hundred. Yeah? So there, my call always is to Member States' governments, and especially to those parties, also here in the Parliament, who have most of the governments in their hands, the European People's Party and the Social Democrats, and
Mr. Plenković,
really
I'm sorry.
get their own colleagues from their own political family on board.
The very same question for you. Is there any EU here in Brussels?
Well, absolutely, there is European Union in Brussels. I think there are three major areas where we should and must achieve progress. One is to do maximum with our international partners to stop the crisis at its source, and that is in particular in Syria. And here we have actually seen some relatively good news about the peace process, about the ceasefire, about the possible elections. And that should, with the help that we have given and extended to Turkey, to Jordan, to Lebanon, limit the flow and the wave of refugees and migrants towards Europe. Second item is to control our external borders, and notably the border between Turkey and the EU. The last European Council conclusions really emphasized the role of NATO, because Turkey is a member of NATO, as a strong country that has really enviable military, police, security potential. I'm sure if it wants to, it can protect also the exit from its coasts, and that's why we have seen and witnessed these tragedies in the Aegean. And the third part is the solidarity within the European Union, a common approach, and not basically doing it chacun pour soi. That type of policy creates barbed wires, creates walls, creates situations where everyone is trying to protect his country, his territory in a manner which does not in itself have a European key notion and key aspect of our development and our foundation, and that is the solidarity on this particular
issue. And what we are now seeing, we are seeing a profiling of people, especially on the Macedonian-Greek border. As we know, international law and the European law says that the right for the asylum is being judged by individual cases. We are seeing people from Syria and Iraq being passed through, as they say, and we see groups of people from Afghanistan and other countries there. How do you, as members of the parliament, as the representatives of your political options, see that? Especially maybe a question first to Mr. Plenković, because we see some countries which are led by members of your political group, from Macedonia to Hungary, are being the ones who impose this kind of policies.
Well, first of all, the, let's say, amalgam of this huge human wave and the river of people that we have seen comes in various manners. Not all are fleeing for their life from the countries torn by war or failing states. Others are just using this context for the classical economic immigration. And this is a fact. So what we should do is also, when we look at it in the context of the fight against terrorism, having adequate registration and profiling of migrants or refugees or the asylum seekers is reasonable, and it's also something actually we should do, because we have seen that some of those people who were involved in the horrible terrorist attacks in Paris actually might have passed through the Eastern Mediterranean.
No, we haven't. So that they were from Europe, basically, European citizens.
And you wouldn't have prevented that with ethnically saying who's from where.
It's not an absolutely ethnical connotation. I'm just saying that we, as a system that protects its external borders, has to have a reliable data of who is actually getting into the European Union. I mean, that is a normal way that the Schengen was functioning. Bear in mind, for instance, we are still members of the EU, but not members of Schengen. Yeah. And you know it well. When you were flying here, you had to pass just like any other citizen coming from a non-EU country. So there is nothing strange about it.
But is the strange picture? You said protecting the borders and protecting Schengen.
Yes.
But when you see Czech military on Greece-Macedonian border pointing guns and little kids over the fence, what's going on?
The technology of work, performance. Normally, the police should be the one first at the borders, but this is an extraordinary situation, obviously, having as a consequence extraordinary answers. Nobody is in favor of barbed wires or guns being pointed at kids. On the contrary,
but that's what's happening.
Look at the example of Croatia. We had almost 700,000 people going through our country.
But from today we have an army on Slovenian Croatian border.
Only one person has died, but that's a Slovenian Državni Zbor decision, not the Croatian Parliament decision, as a possibility. So we will see. It all depends on the countries which are on the receiving end, and in particular Germany. And if the policy changes there, then it's very unlikely that other countries which are on the route can remain in the
but sorry, it doesn't only depend on Germany. Germany was the one who has been receiving, besides Sweden and Austria, most of the refugees. Many other countries have not. Yeah, they don't even take one. Yeah, because they say we're not used to refugees, we're not used to Muslims. That's why we don't take any. I find this so extremely unsolidarious, which is really horrible. But the other the thing on the Afghans.
I'm in favor of relocation.
You are, but many others aren't. So it's not just up to Germany; it's up to the others. And the thing with the Afghans at the border with Macedonia, Greece-Macedonia, that I also find, I mean, this ethnic sort of profiling is something totally against also the Geneva Convention and against asylum seekers. If somebody says, I need asylum, then this person has to be checked whether he or she is really eligible for having asylum, on an individual basis. And you know, the Afghans are coming, many of them from Iran now, because Iran, over the last half year, stopped their residence or permits that they had on staying in Iran after they had fled from Afghanistan. So that's something maybe we should also talk with the Iranians when there are talks about that.
Would be nice to hear a non-political voice. What do you think about the EU response? I mean, it's obvious that there are many different views on how to resolve this crisis.
And I have to add to this, because Federica Mogherini at the beginning of all this said one very interesting quote for me. She said, this is here to stay, and as soon as we understand it and adapt ourselves to it, the better we will be to handle that out. So can Europe adapt that in the future? Because Europe in the future will most certainly be different as we know it today.
So the first thing is, and you mentioned it when you were making your introduction, was the unpredictable nature of this crisis. And in fact, it was entirely predictable. That's what's even more tragic about it. It also feeds off other crises. So you have a crisis of EU governance, EU legitimacy at the same time, and the responses are increasingly populist, opportunist, and things like ethnic profiling at the border. These are the kind of responses that are essentially against the way that the EU is formed, the way that the EU is supposed to work. So how, this new EU that's being created, first of all, we've got to try and figure out what's wrong with the current EU, okay? And for that, you need EU leadership. And it doesn't mean leadership responding to a security response only. You've got to look back, Geneva Convention, you stick to that, you see what you can do to protect people as they come through, and you create a unified response. Now, a unified response is an EU common asylum policy. It's an EU agency on asylum. It's an EU border guard. It's not an individualized barbed wire response, which is essentially what's happening now.
And maybe can I just add one thing, because I had a TV debate just with the Austrian Minister of the Interior on Sunday, and the one thing that came up to me is why hasn't any of the member states, including my own, Austria or others, called this directive in German, it's Massenzustromrichtlinie, the mass influx guideline, which was done in 2000 after the Balkan Wars, which said that for a temporary time, people can, according to the group they come from, according to the country they come from, they can get kind of temporary refuge.
Temporary protection.
And they don't have each and every one to be proven that he or she is an asylum seeker. Because they come from a certain region, they come from a certain city that has been under bombardment or something, that would have been something. Each member state can ask that to the council to open that. So that would have been something, at least for some time. I prefer to have asylum as such, for each person. But if it's that would have been an option. None of the member states has asked for that. I really wonder where these member states are living in this common Europe. They only think in their very tight national borders. Now, for example, the Austrian government is planning for tomorrow a Balkan migration conference with ministers of the interior and exterior, which in general I don't mind, without inviting Greece, without having the Commission there. This is something, why don't we act together? And not just one EU and then Slovenia and Croatia and the Balkan countries, the 6 Western Balkans, and not Greece.
Everyone is acting, and the directors of police. Before we continue, we'll just again try to think about the people who are passing. So I'm just suggesting we see a Reuters material from Croatian-Serbian border a couple of days ago.
We are human! 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 You and nobody! You and nobody! You and nobody!
We don't want to go to any country. We want living in Croatia, but don't allow to us. The police push us to Trad. You had to. You must go to Trad.
أنا سوري ليش رجعوني هاي أنا وعائلتي معنا هويات نحن سوريين.
You all know that any of you has the right to seek asylum in Serbia. Do you know about this? Wait. The government told us that if you don't choose first or the second option, then they will apply the national law, which may mean detention and expulsion.
Let's talk about the option now that are on the table. What's your assessment about the Visegrad Group initiative to build a fence on the southern Europe of Macedonia, Bulgaria and Albania? Could you imagine such a scenario and consequences if this initiative is going to be realized?
No, as I've said before, I don't think that fences and borders are solutions. Yeah? We have to find a common solution. It means building places where people can stay, where there's like reception centers. I don't like the term hotspot. Yeah? Places like now built in Greece and in Italy. We could even, I mean, with UNHCR, work with the refugees that are in Turkey and also in Lebanon, in the region, to see which of ones they should be taken in. But that requires that member states don't just, like the Visegrad countries, say not with us, yeah? Even though they received from the EU lots of money for years in order to build up their economy after the fall of the Iron Curtain. And now they're saying, no, we don't want to. This is simply, for me, it's unacceptable. Yeah.
No, I still think the key issue is the Turkish-Greek border. I think that should be the fundamental policy of the
Why do you
European
think
Union.
it's not functioning until now? Because we saw, okay, it's a huge border,
we have seen
but
how many traffickers have profited, people taking money of those people like the ones that we just saw in your little sort of contribution to this television show. And I think that those who were profiting on it, whether it was previously through the Mediterranean route, Lampedusa, Italy, etc., now Turkish-Greek border, we have seen how the little boats were bought, who were the people actually transferring people across Aegean. There were too many people profiting from it. The key is our accent on Turkey. Turkey has been clearly identified, summit was held, even the negotiations on enlargement have continued. 3 billion euros are being allocated for Turkey. Turkey is the closest one to the crisis. People who find their shelter in Turkey have an opportunity perhaps to return sooner whenever the situation stabilizes in Syria and Iraq. There are many reasons to opt for this option. Greece is a member of the European Union. We know that our Macedonian friends say we are actually overflooded with refugees coming from the European Union. And moreover, from one of the key countries when it comes to the Macedonians' road to the European Union. So this is an absurd situation, and therefore protecting external borders with this border and coast guard that we are now, and the Commission has proposed, and I'm sure there'll be a positive answer on it on the European level. This should be the priority rather than the other buffer zone that you mentioned.
You've mentioned Turkey deal. Concerning the events, let's call it an eastern territory. Okay, Syria is going on, but we have a huge action of Erdogan's regime toward Kurds. So basically, and we also have this 3 billion fund which has to be filled at the end.
Exactly.
So basically, is Turkey a partner on this or a really good negotiator and, I don't know, maybe it's a harsh word, the blackmailer playing with destinies?
Turkey is our NATO ally. It's a country that has started negotiations for accession the same day as Croatia on 3rd of October 2005. It has all the interests and reasons in institutional political context to be an interlocutor that will help us solve this, try to solve the solution.
But I think...
So let's go back to the smuggling question. Now, the smuggling issue, it's a symptom of the current situation. Now, you don't solve the symptom by putting up another symptom, which is a barbed wire fence. You actually move to see how to get safe routes to Europe, how to make sure the reception centers, both within Europe and on the other side, are well funded, that have enough finances going to them, that there are employment opportunities in those countries, in the frontline states. So I think it's wrong every time we bring it back to borders, because borders are just a symptom of what we're talking about. It's much bigger, and it requires surge funding from the EU to actually deal with this way before you get to the border situation.
Another idea is the proposal of European Stability Initiative from Greece back to Turkey as a safe country, and from there humanly organized resettlement.
Well, I mean, that is part of the things that are being discussed, and I don't mind having Turkey as a partner. My problem with Turkey at the moment is the way Erdogan is acting with the Kurds. Yeah, I mean, bombing, shooting people, civilians there, but also with media. Yeah, and this is clearly a very authoritarian trait that this government is going now. So my problem is there that even though I also think yes, we need to talk with Turkey, but we cannot do that without mentioning this authoritarian way Erdogan is doing at the moment. But having sort of funding,
in a way,
for example,
EU is blackmailed by Turkey.
Yes, and that,
I mean,
for example, we as Greens, we've all, yeah.
You have not to mention any
Yeah,
problem
that,
with
that
Libyan
I don't
democracy.
agree. That I don't agree. Yeah, with partners you have to be very clear. Yeah, if you need them, yes, you have to talk with them, but you also have to raise the issues that you're not like, that you don't like. As Greens, we've always been in favor of opening chapters 23 and 24 and negotiating with Turkey to get the pro-European forces in Turkey on our side. And unfortunately, for many years in this House, many groups, yours and others, have been blocking that, yeah? And now, yes, they want to do it. But I also think the money should not go to the government, that's 3 billion euro. They should go to UNHCR and those who really work with the refugees. Because when it goes through the government, it might go probably only to those where the Sunnites are and not the other refugees, or it might even end up in some other channels where doesn't belong.
On this issue, I mean, 3 billion euros doesn't come with no strings attached, that's clear. There is a different dialogue now between the European Commission and Turkey. But we have to see what the benefits of that dialogue are, and so far we're not seeing that. So that's one thing the European Commission needs to solve. But let's take it back to the Western Balkans, to the Balkans countries themselves, where there is backsliding now on some of the reforms that happened through the accession process. And if the migration crisis and other crises overshadow backsliding that's happening in those countries as well, then again, we're replicating another crisis.
And we had an issue last year between Croatian and Serbian Prime Minister. Again, old hatred sparked up when the refugee crisis was at its peak, basically. So can we expect another thing like that?
What's important here is the EU needs to look at the Balkan countries as partners to solve problems. And for that, there's got to be mutual respect, but there has to be, conditions laid down that are trusted and respected.
Well, when it comes to that particular issue, it was a very short economic blockade, completely unnecessary, and I'm sure that the new Croatian government has already established very good contacts with the Hungarian government, with the Slovenian, and the same goes on our relations with Belgrade, which have many other residual issues still from the time of the Greater Serbia and Milosevic's aggression, not only against Croatia but Bosnia and Herzegovina, but we have a solid dialogue and channels of communication to avoid such blockade as we have seen in September.
Let's resume. I mean, if the building fences on the southern border is not an option, if we have many difficulties to cooperate with Turkey for the second plan, so what's the plan? The situation is getting worse.
And the summer is coming.
We need a solution now. So what? Is there any idea how to resolve the problem?
No, but the one big hope is that with the political negotiations on Syria, that there will be, hopefully soon, at least a truce, and at least that weapons will stop. And then, ISIS still will be there, but at least the killing in Syria by the side of Assad, of Russians and others will stop. So that might already be one thing. The other thing I find what has been really not happening from EU member states, and from my own either, is really financing UNHCR financing, because a reason why many people are leaving from the refugee camps in the Middle East is because living conditions there simply are very dire. If you don't have food, if you don't have water, if you don't have education for your children, then you finally say, well, this is not getting better, I'm leaving. So there's also responsibility of EU member states for that. And because you said very rightly so that having the Balkan countries as partners, the Western Balkans, for example, together with the EU Commission, with member states in the area and others, try to find a way which countries can take in refugees, support each other, having them also in some of the Balkan countries, but in an organized way, in a helping way, in them helping to build. There are ways to build also refugee centers with buildings like wood or others that go very fast and then can be taken over for other purposes later on.
May I just say one point? Let's not forget, we have the European agenda on migration. We have the Asylum Migration Integration Fund. We have the Internal Security Fund. We have the whole development policy with a lot of money being invested. And this is where the European Union, who is the greatest donor of development policy, which has its comprehensive catalogue of foreign policy activities, whether it's an emergency rescue, whether it's humanitarian aid, whether it's development, state building. These are the areas where the European Union is strong and where we should channel and organize better our involvement. development. This is, in my view, really essential. And therefore, the cooperation with the United Nations, where we are actually, again, the biggest financier of the whole aid, has to be properly done. There were hiccups in that process in the past, but everything we've been doing, and especially our development committee and commissioners responsible for it, Avramopoulos, Mimica and others, there is really a step forward in that direction, and that's why the coherent approach is.
Can the solution for the European refugee crisis, which I think Ms. Lunacek mentioned, come from the Balkans, concerning the fact that we were in war just 20 years ago? We were European refugees within the European Union, so basically if this kind of thing happened, can we be the one to help Europe at the end of the dawn of humanity as we are witnessing it?
So one lesson from the Balkans is, what was the European response to the Balkans wars? Well, it was slow, and it took a while to move forward. And then what came from that was a common foreign security policy. That's how that emerged. So that was a big response to the crisis in the Balkans. Now we're at another crisis. Lives are being lost. Member states are taking their own line despite lives being lost. So this is what we hope will emerge. Will be a response to a crisis that, that.
How do you see European Union in the foreseeable future? I mean, we are talking about the EU common policy.
Just as a conclusion, shortly, yeah.
Schengen.
There are three problems with the EU at the moment: the process for creating policy, the content of the policy, and the leadership to implement the policy. You've got to tackle all three of those.
Basic things, mainly.
Basic things. You've got to make sure participation, proximity with citizens is actually done in member states, and member states have to do that as well. You've got to have proper process in Brussels, and then you've got to have leadership, EU leadership, that's actually implementing this, and that is having member states buy in, as they should do and have said they would, to EU policy. It's fairly simple. 3 steps.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being our guest today. Poštovani gledatelji, pratili ste emisiju Balkan u Europi. Srdačan pozdrav.
Pozdrav.